Hello and welcome to our webinar where we'll be launching the findings from the evaluation of our TalkBanStop partnership. I'm Anna Hemmings and I'm the CEO here at GamCare, and I'll be moderating today's session, which is being recorded, just so you're aware. I'm joined by Joe Wheeler and Christian Stowe from Ipsos, and they are researchers who've produced the final report, and they'll be presenting on that today, looking at the successes of the first year, how people have experienced layering tools and support, and also considerations for us going forward. After the presentation, there'll be a panel discussion, and you can submit questions via the Q&A in the usual way at the bottom of the screen. On the panel, I'm delighted that we're joined by Fiona Palmer and Jack Simmons, CEOs of GAMSTOP and GamBan respectively, and Darren from our helpline as well. So before we get into the main findings, we're going to kick off with a video from Stacy, one of the many people who've benefited from TalkBanStop.
I was completely consumed by gambling forces. My entire wage was gone within 40 minutes of me being paid. I went from coins to notes to chase the thrill, and from notes to online to hide how much I was gambling. It was easier to do online, where I could transfer my entire wage within a few minutes and gamble all of that, and still that wasn't enough to get that thrill anymore that I needed. And after finally winning what I thought I was chasing, which was the jackpot, and losing it immediately, that's when I realised this isn't about money. I had a problem with gambling. I needed somebody at that point to take control for me, and that's what GamBan and GamStop do every day. They take away the worry. And I was able to find other women who knew what I was talking about, who not just read about it, but who had felt it. And so finally, I didn't feel alone. And women go through this too. Talk to GamCare. Go to TalkBanStop.
So I just want to say thanks to Stacy for sharing her story, and to all the others with lived experience who've supported TalkBanStop so well. So we'll hand over now to Joe and Christian from Ipsos to present the findings from the evaluation.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. I'm Christian Stowe. I'm the lead evaluator of this evaluation, and I'm joined by my colleague, Joe Wheeler, who's a research manager here at Ipsos. And we're here to present the findings from Ipsos's final evaluation of the TalkBanStop pilot. So we've undertaken a combined process and impact evaluation to assess the effectiveness of the pilot's management and delivery mechanisms, and sort of explore the main outcomes that the pilot hoped to achieve at the very outset. So we followed a mixed methods approach that involves speaking with staff delivering the pilot across each of the organizations, as well as National Gambling Helpline call advisors. And we've also undertaken primary research with individuals looking to stop gambling online, and which have actually engaged with some of the tools offered through the TalkBanStop pilot. And we've done this in two main ways, really. So the first was through a survey of individuals that had called the National Gambling Helpline, as well as a survey with GamBan customers. And then the second way that we did this was through longitudinal case studies with 25 individuals that had called the helpline looking for support in stopping gambling online, and which have been signposted to GamBan and GamStop. And we actually achieved a good mix of individuals here, using different types of combinations of tools, which really kind of helps us to explore any differences in gambling patterns between a single tool approach and a layered approach. So this first interview took place roughly sort of 2 to 4 months after they first called the helpline, and really explored any kind of behavior change outcomes relating to their online gambling. And then we spoke to 21 of these individuals again, approximately 6 to 8 weeks later, to explore any kind of sustained behavior change outcomes relating to their gambling online, and how how this has kind of helped them reduce their gambling related harms. The next slide, please, Joe. So first, I just want to talk a little bit about how the partnership has operated and how the three organizations have come together to deliver the pilot. So we found that the pilot partners were actually very quickly able to gear up to deliver the pilot by using their existing organizational resources. So at the outset, there was a concerted effort to inform and train up the National Gambling Helpline call advisors to really be able to signpost effectively to the tools being offered. And this really allowed the pilot to kind of hit the ground running from the very start. We also found the pilot governance arrangements to be well structured and effective in delivering against those pilot objectives. And really, I think the principles kind of underpinning this was a real demonstration of commitment to the pilot from each of the organization's CEOs, which really allowed for effective sort of knowledge exchange between the different pilot partners. We found one of the success stories of the pilot really has been its collaboration. Collaboration between the different pilot partners was really seen to be quite strong amongst the stakeholders that we interviewed, and from our own observation at steering group meetings as well. And I think this has really been driven by a number of factors, really. One of the most important ones seems to be sort of this shared common value in delivering sort of the best service to people that are looking for support to stop gambling online, as well as sort of having CEO visibility within each of the steering group meetings and a well-defined format for those meetings as well. And what we found is that staff feel empowered to kind of communicate freely and share customer feedback with each other, or user feedback with each other, which really allowed them to deliver improvements to the way that the pilot was delivered. And it's really sort of suggesting that, to us, that the three organizations have beginning to sort of operate as one kind of coherent function now when they're delivering the TalkBanStop partnership. Another really strong quality of the partnership that's come through has been its iterative feedback culture, which has really helped kind of support continuous learnings and improvements to the pilot. So this has included pilot partners engaging with call advisors on a monthly basis to get their feedback and really identify areas for improvement to the pilot design. And this has led to various new modes of online gambling having been identified and incorporated into GamBan's blocking software tool to provide greater coverage for people. The team's also been really diligent with tracking key performance indicators as well, which has allowed them to monitor the operational elements of the pilot and ensure that it's maintaining momentum as it's gone on, and really be able to identify risks on an ongoing basis. I'll now hand over to Joe.
Thank you, Christian. So I'm going to be talking through some of the key findings from the evaluation around TalkBanStop awareness raising activities. So this covers the impact of kind of 4 key strands of activity. So firstly, webinars with key stakeholders in the gambling sector. So this included industry representatives, operators, and also organisations involved in treatment or invested in harm reduction. These webinars were then followed up by kind of consistent messaging of the TalkBanStop pilot amongst those stakeholders in the months following the webinars. Separately, a promotion, a PR activity and paid marketing campaign was launched to raise awareness amongst the public and those at risk of gambling harm of the TBS pilot and the tools that people can use as part of the pilot. And finally, there was a real concerted effort across each organisation involved in the pilot to try and align with each other and promote consistent content on their own individual websites, as well as the overall TBS website. So that kind of cohesive working together, which Christian's already alluded to. To kind of measure the impact of each of these strands in the evaluation, we conducted separate bits of research. So we talked to stakeholders following the webinars. We also analysed secondary data collected by the TBS partners on the reach of the campaign, which I'll come on to. And then we also conducted our own nationally representative online survey of the general public to measure the awareness of each tool and the impact of the marketing campaign with the wider public. So starting then with the wider stakeholder engagement. So the evaluation found that following efforts to engage stakeholders, awareness and understanding of the pilot had increased amongst those key stakeholders, and there was definitely some evidence that stakeholders had begun embedding the pilot in their own organizations. Starting with the webinars, these were well received. And the stakeholders who we spoke to reported increased confidence in promoting the scheme and also the different TalkBanStop tools within and outside their organization. So some specific examples of this include, the operators had started to include the TBS TalkBanStop logo in their TV adverts. There was emails about TalkBanStop sent to customer bases amongst some stakeholders, a partnership with the EFL as well, which meant that the TalkBanStop logo appeared on digital hoardings around grounds and championship matches, as well as kind of sponsored Twitter posts by some organisations, TalkBanStop leaflets appearing in banks, branches of banks, and also supporting paid adverts in newspapers. So lots of really positive examples of where stakeholders have engaged and actively promoted the TalkBanStop pilot during the last sort of 18 months. In terms of just one kind of barrier that was mentioned to engagement was the temporary nature of the pilot. So this was mentioned by a few people as something that meant certain stakeholders were more reluctant to fully commit and buying into the scheme because it was seen as a pilot. But overall, lots of positive engagement amongst stakeholders. And then moving on to the marketing strategy, the promotion and paid campaign. So the marketing campaign was launched alongside the pilot scheme when the scheme started. So the first burst of this was in December 2020. And this was followed by a second burst in June 2021 to coincide with the Euros. The campaign was mainly focused on those aged between 25 and 44. This was identified as the audience at most risk of gambling harms. And as the creatives you can see on the screen there, which you can see reflect that targeting. The campaign was overall a success in terms of its objectives and reach. So 24.6 million added over the two bursts. And what this next slide shows really is this is data collected by the partners on visits to the bespoke TalkBanStop website that was set up. There's a direct correlation here between the marketing activity that was launched and spikes in visits to the TalkBanStop website. So around December and June, as you can see in that chart, there were big spikes in people going onto the TalkBanStop website and looking at the different services, and then relatively lower levels of visits while marketing activity wasn't going on. So one of our recommendations, which we'll come on to for future activity, would be to have a kind of steady drumbeat of always on, perhaps social activity of marketing, given how much impact that the marketing seems to have had on driving people to the website. Another way that we kind of measured awareness and the effect of that marketing campaign is through our own online survey, which we did with 2,000 members of the general public through the Ipsos Omnibus panel. And this was really to measure awareness and familiarity of each of the relevant TalkBanStop services, as well as the campaign overall. So we did a survey once before the launch of the pilot and the initial marketing campaign in December 2020, and then again in August 2021 once the second marketing campaign had concluded. So what we found was that amongst the general public, so if we look at the chart on the left there were kind of statistical significant increases in the awareness of each pilot tool from one period, from the first time period to the next. So the blue bar being the first survey that we did, and the green bar being the second. On average, the awareness of each tool increased, while 3 in 10 people said they'd heard of the campaign following the second wave. This didn't necessarily translate to familiarity, so similar proportions saying that they knew a fair amount or a lot about each tool across the 2 waves of surveys. We didn't really see that increase. However, some positive indications definitely that the marketing campaign and the overall awareness efforts were effective in promoting each tool amongst the broader general public. I'm going to hand back over to Christian now, who's going to talk about engagement with TalkBanStop tools and services.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, that's right. So we'll have a quick discussion about the sort of the take up with the different tools here. So the pilot employed a number of different signposting mechanisms to increase take up to the tools on offer here. And there are some examples here on the screen now, but sort of the primary methods for signposting were through the National Gambling Helpline, advisors signposting to people to GAMSTOP and GamBan, as well as also signposting on the individual websites of GamCare, GAMSTOP and GamBan. And as Joe mentioned, there was a sort of a bespoke dedicated TalkBanStop web page, which had the various links and materials that kind of showcase the sort of positive stories that were coming out of the TalkBanStop pilot. And so as part of this evaluation, we actually explored whether the TalkBanStop partnership had led to an increase in the number of calls to the helpline. We sought to do this through time series forecasting econometric methods that essentially allowed us to sort of model and try to predict how many calls to the helpline there would have been if the TalkBanStop partnership was not established. So it was sort of a way of extrapolating the trend in calls that you can see just before the launch of the pilot and extrapolating that to present day. And then we would compare that extrapolation with what we actually saw in terms of the number of calls to the helpline. And we sort of hypothesized at the very beginning that there would be some sort of short-term effects of COVID-19 here, and you know, the effects of people being in lockdown and how that might influence their gambling patterns, and therefore, you know, whether or not individuals would choose or need to seek support and call the helpline. So we've attempted to sort of incorporate these effects into our model, but despite this, there doesn't seem to be consistent findings across the different models that we developed in terms of concluding whether the partnership either increased or decreased the number of calls to the helpline. It seems that varying methods of trying to model those effects of COVID-19 appear to also have varying impacts on the immediate effect of the launch of the pilot on the number of calls. So models which found both statistically significant effects found both a positive and a negative effect of the partnership on the number of calls to the helpline. So for the time being, it's perhaps a bit inconclusive. It may be that the effects of the partnership on the number of calls to the helpline are actually yet to be fully realized as more people become aware of TalkBanStop, or the idea of calling the helpline becomes more normalized among those that want to seek help. And therefore the effects that we might thought would have seen during the pilot might be observed in sort of subsequent years after the launch of TalkBanStop. That being said, case study participants did speak very positively about calling the helpline first to speak about their gambling related issues. So they really highlighted the need for that emotional support on the call, especially those which didn't have close friends or family that they could speak to about their gambling related issues. They also found that the helpline advisor's explanation of the TalkBanStop tools was very clear, and that was a key driver to uptake, although there were some mentions of where calling the helpline first interfered in the window of action during which gamblers are ready to act. So just want to share a nice quote with you from somebody that we spoke to, a case study participant that called the helpline. I'll just give you an opportunity to read that, but it's I think a really nice quote that kind of highlights the importance of having a sort of a professional to speak with in these difficult times. And so similar to the analysis that we did in estimating whether the TalkBanStop partnership had any effects on the number of calls to the helpline, we also did this for GamBan registrations. So looking at whether or not TalkBanStop impacted the number of UK GamBan registrations. And as you can visually see from the chart here, and what we also found in our econometric analysis was that the number of registrations to GamBan actually dropped in the 12-month period after the launch of TalkBanStop. And this result was statistically significant at conventional levels. So we looked into this. If you could go on to the next slide, please, Joe. So we looked into this just to see if there were any sort of potential barriers to participation by surveying GamBan customers that had chosen to pay rather than sign up using the free link provided through TalkBanStop. And as you can see from the chart, it didn't really have anything to do with sort of general motivators of people wanting to stop, nor was there anything fundamentally wrong with the sign-up process. It was more that people wanted to see what it was like using the software and wanting to trial GamBan software first before making that full commitment to sign up for 6 months or a year. And so, as Anna mentioned earlier, sort of a layered approach here to stopping gambling online is really assumed to sort of reduce or altogether stop individuals from gambling online. And we found this to have occurred through two main ways. So the first is that using multiple tools alters the state of mind of individuals such that they don't believe that they can gamble online due to the restrictions in place and hence don't attempt to gamble online. And the second is the fact that having multiple tools actually makes the action of trying to circumvent them much more difficult. So just to unpick that a little bit more, one of the important intermediate outcomes of taking a layered approach is around gamblers having experienced a more positive state of mind relating to their almost desire to gamble online. So at the outset of the pilot, it was really envisaged that using multiple tools would change the way that gamblers perceived their ability to gamble online. With those individuals that take a layered approach would experience feelings of reduced temptation and improved faith in being able to stop gambling online. And those feelings of temptation to gamble reduced over time for nearly all of the case study participants that we spoke to as a result of decreased accessibility or perception thereof of gambling online. But that change in mindset seems to be strongest amongst individuals that have taken up the layered approach, as this provides the perception of most complete blocking coverage. Just go on to the next slide for me, please, Chad. So the majority of case studies that we spoke to, which have taken a layered approach, and by this we mean using at least 2 of the tools promoted through the partnership, have not gambled since signing up to these, really demonstrating the effectiveness of the layered approach. And the use of 3 tools has shown greater success in stopping individuals from gambling online. Interestingly, these individuals have chosen not to attempt to gamble online at all, indicating that state of mind towards gambling has been more sustained amongst these types of gamblers. There was a sort of a small minority of individuals that did experience sort of very strong urges to gamble and hence did attempt to and find a way to gamble online. But we explored this a bit further with these participants and actually found that being signed up to multiple tools still proved useful to these users, even in cases where they successfully circumvented the tools. And the reasons for this were sort of twofold. First being that taking the layered approach actually made the act of circumventing much more deliberate. And so that kind of resulted in feelings of guilt that would often discourage them from attempting to do that again. And the second reason was that taking a layered approach made the act of circumventing much more difficult and therefore reduced the options available to gamble online, which then ultimately diminished the desire to do it with those sites again. So when speaking with case study participants, they really stress the importance of a layered approach. And here are just some examples on the screen of some of the benefits of the individual services. But when used together, they provide these sort of compound benefits for people when they take a layered approach. And we should point out that nearly all case study participants had previously attempted to stop gambling online by using just a single approach, a single tool, such as self-excluding from individual operators. And in none of these cases has it proved effective in sustained behavior change. And hence these individuals actually give a really useful reference point because they sort of tried a single tool approach, it's not worked, and therefore been able to experience both a single tool and a layered approach. And they were really able to highlight the importance of using those tools in combination with one another. So case study participants also believe the recovery journey could be further supported by resolving the root problem of their online gambling behavior. And this finding was substantiated by individuals that had taken up some form of therapeutic services in addition to the tools. And this further support has really tended to provide individuals with those coping mechanisms that they need to deal with the urges to gamble, both online and in person, which is really, I think, to sort of emphasize the importance of helpline call advisors signposting callers to therapy where they deem appropriate, as they have been doing throughout the entire pilot period. Merchant code blocking was also an additional layer taken up by several of the case study participants that took part in our evaluation study. And many of them were able to highlight the merits of the service. So in most cases, merchant code blocking was used as an additional blocker that participants felt provided them reassurance that the blocks in place to gamble online were comprehensive. And this layer of protection against online gambling also led to perhaps an unintended benefit, which was that it also provided some form of protection against those which might have otherwise chosen to gamble in person at shops. So that having that bank blocking also stopped them from being able to do that as well, which is really positive additional benefit of the bank blocking offering. And this feels to be quite an important added benefit, as there is evidence here of individuals continuing to gamble in person. Although we should mention this wasn't true for all individuals, and I guess the frequency and amount of money spent in person was significantly less than what was being spent online previously. I'll just hand over to Jonah, who will talk about the findings related to the reduction in gambling-related harms amongst those case study participants.
Thank you, Christian. So as Christian mentioned earlier, we undertook several longitudinal case study interviews. So basically we spoke to people at the kind of start when they signed up to the TalkBanStop pilot, and also 6 months later into using the tools, which I think is a really, really valuable part of our evaluation, because it essentially allowed us to monitor people's progress and start to look at some sort of short to medium term outcomes in terms of their behavior change and any reductions in gambling related harm, specifically as a result of using the TalkBanStop tools. And it's, we found some really positive findings, broadly speaking. It was clear that individuals that were able to kind of stop gambling online, whether it be through GamStop, GamBan, or both, had reduced their online gambling, and then sort of linked to that experienced a reduction in gambling related harms, and reductions in harm reported in 5 key areas. I imagine these areas will be familiar to most people listening, but sort of the main one, as we might have expected, really, that had the most success really was around financial harm. So people that had managed to stop their gambling online or greatly reduce their gambling online also saw a reduction in financial harms. And this was true even for those who were still gambling a little bit or gambling some of the time, as they were gambling, at a reduced rate than before, spending less time, maybe spending less money when gambling online. And similarly, I think linked to this really, people who talked about maybe they'd had sort of conflict or disruption to relationships previously with family or friends, had also reported improvements since using the TalkBanStop pilot tools. This was, again, sometimes linked to finances, largely driven by the fact that people had been a sort of a financial burden on their friends or family, talked about how they'd had to borrow money, and people being a bit more financially independent and therefore able to kind of re-engage in social activities and start to, in their eyes, lead a bit more of a normal life again, and socialize with friends. This was limited in some cases due to the effects of COVID-19 during the pilot, obviously meant that people were kind of locked away for some of that time, but there were definitely some impacts there. Some people also talked about those who'd kind of had harms of emotional well-being, mental health issues. They'd also reported a positive change in their emotional well-being after being able to stop gambling online. And similarly, people who'd reported kind of physical health issues or performance issues with work or studying also reported improvements in those areas. People talked about a greater being able to focus more at work, or being able to focus on extracurricular extracurricular activities, becoming healthier in other aspects of life, like exercise and healthy eating, because they were spending less time consumed by gambling. So, you know, overall, a really, really positive perspective from the vast majority of our case study participants who'd managed to stop themselves or reduce themselves from gambling online. Before we move on just to some kind of final considerations, we'll just finish on what we think is a really powerful quote, which I think summarizes what I've just been talking about, and someone describing the impact of taking part in TalkBanStop. So I'll let you read that for a moment before we move on to some considerations moving forward. So just to summarize then and wrap up before we move on to some Q&A. So as part of the evaluation, we provided some formative learnings to the pilot partnership group, including some sort of recommendations that we feel will help maximize the impact of the partnership moving forward. These can be found in much more detail in our final report, but we've just kind of summarized these today, which we think are the main ones. So the first one, I think, is the importance of continued awareness raising activities, you know, help ensure individuals which have so far maybe not engaged with the pilot's services to make sure that they're aware of its availability as a support option and can reach out when they want to. So continuing to try and press that awareness raising. Given the positive views of case study participants towards merchant code blocking as a part of this, you know, people really talked about how it's helpful to get that service included and get their bank to block them doing transactions, you know, particularly as well with you know, people do in-person betting as well, not just online gambling, of course. So we strongly recommend this form of protection to become a core feature of the TalkBanStop offering on all kind of marketing and signposting materials. So it becoming a kind of core tenet of the overall tool offer. As we mentioned previously, there was some evidence of individuals continuing to gamble in person. So TalkBanStop may wish to signpost individuals to schemes that block people from gambling in person, such as, you know, multi-operator self-exclusion schemes that are land-based. So it could consider kind of linking up with those. Christian has already mentioned the possible merits of highlighting the option to trial GamBan's blocking software first before making any long-term commitments to blocking. So I think that's important as well. And lastly, the partnership may wish to explore other options that block other forms of online gambling, such as those within private messaging groups and also in-app Play Store purchases that may have a gambling element to them. This was mentioned by some participants. So I think that's everything we've got to say today. So thank you for listening. I think we'll hand back to Anna for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Christian. It's been a really thorough evaluation. So we're going to move into a Q&A. You can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens to submit questions. We've got some coming in already. So Joe and Christian are staying with us on the panel. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got Fiona, CEO of GamStop, Jack, CEO of GamBan, and Darren, who works on the National Gambling Helpline. Darren, I think it might be nice to just come to you first, because you're answering calls day in, day out on the helpline. And I just wondered, from your perspective, talking to callers, what's the response been like from people and what sort of things are you hearing?
Yeah, overall, thanks, Anna, for asking that. Overall, it's been a really positive response. Personally speaking, and through talking with the colleagues, it's an incredibly simple and effective way of getting that first intervention into addressing the gambling. Quite often, we'll get people come through and just specifically ask for the GamBan code to block. That's it. But what that then does is give us the opportunity then to have a further conversation and let them know that there are other tools like the GamStop, like the bank blocking. So yeah, it's been incredibly useful in that. And then if that isn't enough for them, then we can then offer them the extra support the clinical help, the signposting to further support services in their area. So yeah, it's been a great initiative for us on the helpline.
Yeah, sounds like it's been a good sort of conversation starter and opener for you, for people. Yeah,
very much so. Yeah.
Excellent. Okie doke. And a question for Joe and Christian. Did you find that for people who only used one of the blocks, they, although they might have had good motivation, they did find ways to circumvent, or did you find that people weren't trying to do that?
No, so I guess the change in mindset towards wanting to gamble online was not as strong for those individuals that had just taken up the single tool, when you're comparing that to people that have taken up 2 or 3 tools. So they had urges to gamble and they attempted to gamble. And in some cases, they were successful in being able to circumvent whichever tool they had taken up, whether that had been GamBan or GamStop or the bank blocking. So there were instances, yeah, where that not having that full layered protection was not successful. There were individuals where it did work for them, but there were others where that didn't work. We probably is worth saying as well, though, that amongst everybody that we spoke to, and I kind of mentioned this as well before, is that everybody had tried a single tool approach, once in their life before calling up the helpline and being signposted to these different tools. Everybody's tried a single tool approach before, and that's why we've spoken to them, is because it's not resulted in that sustained behaviour change they're looking for. So it seems as though, certainly amongst the people that we've spoken to, the layered approach and those that take up the 3 tools seems to have the strongest sort of sustained impact on that behaviour change that people are looking for.
Yeah, and what really struck me was that came through in 2 ways, really. One was the physical act of having a number of blocks in place means that circumvention is actually more difficult, but the mindset was different, it struck me, in people who had used 3 tools and spoken to the helpline. Yeah,
exactly. And that came through by the very fact that they decided not to even attempt to gamble, which I think is a really impressive feat for somebody who's typically these people have, those that took up the 3 tools, they often had, quite extensive history of gambling and had experienced real problems with their gambling beforehand. So to take up the 3 tools and then not to want to even attempt to gamble online, I think is really impressive, sort of 4 to 6 months after signing up to these tools, just because they've had such extensive history of gambling before, and that addiction is quite strong amongst those individuals. That really came through to us.
Yeah, and it sounds, the quality of life changes are quite considerable, aren't they, in terms of, relationships, money, health and well-being.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it came through even just after the first interview that we had with people, sort of 2 to 4 months after using these tools, was certainly in the financial harms dimension of things. It was that came through, and people were experiencing that even almost immediately. Typically amongst these individuals, they would spend, large amounts of their weekly or monthly salary going directly towards gambling. So they were experiencing these improvements in reducing that type of harm almost immediately. I think if we'd have spoken to them even just a few weeks after using the tools, they'd have probably said the same thing around that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you. Fiona, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about how others can get involved, really. What support can be offered through financial services, through gambling operators and others?
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Joe and Christian, for the fantastic feedback from the evaluation and all the work that you've done with it. In terms of support from, particularly, I guess, from gambling operators and financial services, what we're looking for is ultimately, we need to raise awareness to your customers about TalkBanStop, because if people know that TalkBanStop is here and there, and then in the time of need, you never know whether it's a friend, a family member, or an individual themselves who might need our services. So the tools and speaking to National Gambling Helpline. So helping us, what we need you to do is to promote TalkBanStop. An easy way to do that is on the social media channels, as Joe pointed out in the evaluation, it's picked up that there's been some fantastic work already by some of the key stakeholders across operators and financial services. But if everybody does this, then we'll reach a much wider base. Also, signposting TalkBanStop on your websites, your sites and channels, and when you're speaking with your customers. One thing that's to note, whilst we talk about TalkBanStop and going to the National Gambling Helpline as the first port of call, if someone comes to GamStop first, for example, we take the no wrong door approach. They're in the TalkBanStop cycle. So we will hand them over to the National Gambling Helpline where they can access free GamBan software. Likewise, if they go to the GamBan website first and they access GamBan there, then GamBan will signpost them and hand them over to the National Gambling Helpline. So there's definitely a no wrong door approach there. And that means for operators who are already signposting GamStop, it means that if customers are in that self-exclusion journey, then they naturally coming to GamStop first would make sense for that cohort of individuals. But as I say, we hand them over into TalkBanStop through, handing them over to the National Gambling Helpline. So in addition to kind of signposting on your websites, opportunity, definitely putting the logo somewhere on websites, because logos resonate with people. And so if you see it's you've seen it's on the GamStop site, you've seen it's on the GamCare site, and it's on the GamBan site as well. But the wider recognition that we get of this logo, it will resonate with individuals in their time of need. Also encourage staff to speak, those frontline staff who speak to customers. If it's appropriate, then mention TalkBanStop. You can't beat, as Darren says, kind of having that conversation with customers and getting them to the right place for the right help at the right time. So we are going to be providing some more material that will help stakeholders to signpost and what more they can do. And also, I mean, as Joe mentioned, some of the key stakeholders who worked with us during the first year of this pilot, they did far more activity by providing free credits on Twitter, by advertising through EFL, part of the advertising through the EFL sponsorship, as well as adding TalkBanStop logo to some TV advertising. I mean, the more that we can do this is about raising the awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a comment actually from someone who's found some of the tools really significantly, hugely helpful in their recovery, who has said, have we considered TV and radio advertising for TalkBanStop? Because of the fact that brand awareness for gambling operators is so strong through those channels. And raising awareness of TalkBanStop in a similar way would be great. And I mean, I don't know how you guys feel, but I think it'd be a fantastic thing to be able to do. It's mainly resources that are prohibitive. What do you think about that, Jack?
I think it sounds like a great idea, and one of the things that we've experienced working with some of the stakeholders is that kind of creative license to raise visibility in ways that only they can help with. So as Fiona mentioned, the perimeter advertising with EFL, the TV advertising, these have been fantastic opportunities that realistically we wouldn't have had the resources to do out of our own budgets. So anything that organizations with a large amount of reach and resources can do to help support this and share the message would be great. I mean, I think for us there's been a lot of experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't, and we haven't yet really seen an opportunity to advertise on radio or TV. But I think it would be fantastic to find out if that is helpful in possibly countering the abundance of gambling ads on TV, and at least sort of giving a bit of a bit more visibility for people who don't know about the services.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think everybody agrees that gambling is a very under-recognised issue, and so normalising a first step for people who want to take steps to stop gambling is a big thing, I think, for us. And I think we're probably realistically at a fairly early stage in that journey. Mm-hmm. A question for Joe and Christian. Somebody's asked about whether any other measures than self-report were used to measure harm reduction among the participants. And if not, do you have any reflections on how that might have been done?
So yeah, I mean, we did mostly look. So our evaluation of the reduction in gambling harms did only come from sort of the self-reported ways through the interviews that we did through our longitudinal case studies. I mean, we tried to give case studies or individuals the opportunity to kind of tell us the types of harms that they're experiencing before we would I guess ask targeted questions that might give us evidence against each of those different harms. I guess one way we could do this would be look to I guess survey a wider sort of population of people from the TalkBanStop customer base, and this could be something that I guess the individual pilot partners could do moving forward as well. So GamBan's got their own survey that they do sort of varying points throughout the year, and GamCare also have a follow-up survey which they ask each of their helpline callers after each call. So there could be an opportunity there to ask some additional questions to kind of get a broader base of evidence here amongst individuals that have called the helpline, and sort of see what different types of harms they experienced before the call, and I guess how this is sort of changed once they've taken up the various tools.
Okay, thanks, Christian. So we've had a question too about whether we would collaborate with, I suppose, the treatment sector more widely with TalkBanStop. And I think it's probably worth saying that is something that we have done. Obviously, not everybody will contact the National Gambling Helpline as a first port of call. Some people go direct to a local service, and we have made TalkBanStop available through those routes as well. But that's definitely something we've looked to strengthen. And I think this partnership has been about collaboration at its absolute heart. And I think that's something we'd certainly want to extend with other organisations as well. And we'll be sharing more information about that after the webinar. And as Fiona said, various steps that organisations can take to support TalkBanStop. Jack, I thought I'd come to you and just ask, really from your perspective, what do you think the benefits of the layered approach have been?
Well, we often talk about the tools together as a safety net or a sieve, and where the combination of these tools closes the gaps and improves that level of friction, so that when people want to gamble, or when people have that urge or impulse to gamble, it's much harder to do so. Christian explained a lot of this, but drawing out some of the points from the evaluation, seeing that the layered approach to the pilot has been effective in driving behaviour change, particularly financial and relationship-centric changes, that's been obviously a major benefit to that layered effect. But the part that's been the most surprising, or at least the most surprising to me, is the piece around perception and this change in mindset, knowing that the protection is there, and that so that as people view these tools as obstacles to accessing gambling sites, that's led to the reduced appetite and on the more positive side, the enhanced motivation to stop gambling. So by adding all of these tools together, and I definitely like to see merchant code blocking being more included within the TalkBanStop proposition, this together gives people not just a space where they can begin the recovery journey, but a sort of both a physical and a perceived space for safe recovery with a reduced chance of lapsing and relapse.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I mean, it's been so interesting, hasn't it, to explore what people choose to use, how they use it, what difference it makes in their lives. It's been a really interesting year or so that we've all worked together, and the evaluations had really very rich findings.
Yeah.
Just as a final point, let's have a bit of a think about next steps. Probably a question that I'll ask Fiona and Jack and Ipsos too. What do you think are the natural next steps for the partnership, if we just maybe share one key point each? Fiona, should we come to you first?
Yeah, I think it's reflecting on the first year of the pilot, what's worked well, and then what hasn't worked as well, and also looking at the opportunities. So there's some opportunities that have come out of the evaluation. So things like, I guess, the feedback that GamBan, the trial on GamBan, people want to try the product first, and then incorporating that into TalkBanStop. I mean, it ties in with the no wrong door approach as well. So it's kind of, we've gone out understandably with a pilot for the first year in a specific format, purposefully, to just to kind of, we need to get out there, and we've seen actually how powerful it is, as a TalkBanStop coming together, as resonating for people, and actually what we provide together in terms of protection. So I would say for us, and our challenge to ourselves is to, how can we improve on that by looking at, let's not stay static. We need to look at the options that are there to improve it.
Yeah, that's brilliant, thank you. Christian, we'll come over to you.
Yeah, so I think it's probably come out in what we've discussed today, but I think a really important kind of next step, which has sort of already been happening throughout the pilot period, but really kind of emphasizing moving forward the importance of taking up the bank blocking as a core feature. I think it's, we know that helpline advisors have been signposting to this during their calls, and it is still, it's on the various websites, but I think just kind of bringing that to the forefront and really kind of emphasizing that, not only because it adds that additional layer of protection to people that are looking to stop gambling online, but also, as I mentioned, there's some individuals that have either continued or substituted that gambling behavior and moved to in-person betting. And some of those individuals have felt that, one, they've tried to gamble in person, they've gone to a sort of a betting shop where they've already accidentally blocked themselves, but also it's that, again, perceived perception of reduced accessibility, and they've chosen not to go in the betting shop now because they think that they're blocked because they blocked themselves online. So I think that's a really important feature that should really kind of come to the forefront with the rest of the tools moving forward.
Yeah, I completely agree about that, and the point about merchant code blocking being effective for land-based is really key, I think, for us to think about, and engaging financial services as well in this conversation. Joe, did you want to add anything to that?
I think just to reiterate what everyone else has said, but also our final point on, I know from speaking to Jack and others that, there's continued sort of innovations on how, the services can expand to things like, Play Store groups, Play Store purchases, gaming, that sort of thing. And I think, that I think will also be really important, just to continue layering up the kind of effectiveness of each of these tools, and just giving people that really assurance and confidence that these tools are really effective in blocking them from doing any kind of online gambling. I think will be really important moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. And Jack, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, a few things. I mean, everything that everyone has said, definitely. I think more visibility, if we've learned anything from the marketing, the sort of two spikes, I think by having a more sustained, steady drumbeat of marketing for visibility, but I think also a lot more training for operator and bank support staff, so that the actual the language, the positioning, the communication of the tools can be as optimized as possible. People on the front line, and so I think there's quite a lot from our side that we need to do in terms of webinars and training to get that message and get the language and get all the sort of the guidelines over, so that people on the front line are aware of how to talk about TalkBanStop.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we'll begin to wrap up. I mean, I think the evaluation has been hugely insightful in terms of how people are using the layered support and what they're getting out of it, and in that sense it has been a great success, and I guess the collaboration also has been a really positive thing for all of the organisations involved. And we're really excited to be continuing this partnership and developing and acting on some of the recommendations from the evaluation. So I'd just like to thank all of you for being here today. Thanks to the panelists for joining us. After today, we're going to send a link to the TalkBanStop webpage where we've got new marketing materials and social media assets, as well as a 5-step guide to how you can support TalkBanStop going forward. If you've got any more questions that come up or you want to talk to us about anything, don't hesitate to get in touch by emailing webinar@gamcare.org.uk and we'll get back to you. But for now, I think that's all from us. Thanks very much. Bye.